What if the most powerful man in the world wanted to be a woman? Imagine an emperor who offered a king's ransom to any surgeon who could castrate him and give him female anatomy. An emperor who wore silk robes, wigs, and makeup and demanded to be called not lord, but lady. An emperor who took a man of former Slavia's, his husband, and lovingly referred to him as the master of his life. This wasn't a mad fantasy, this was Rome. And this was the story of Elagabalus, the teenage emperor whose 4-year reign was one of the most bizarre, scandalous, and revolutionary chapters in the annals of history. It is a story of absolute power meeting absolute transgression, a story that would expose the deepest fears of an empire and end in blood, chaos, and a desperate attempt to erase him from memory entirely. To understand how a boy from a distant province could so thoroughly shatter Roman society, we must first understand the world that created him. The Roman Empire of the early 3rd century AD was a sprawling, multicultural giant, but it was an empire under strain. Its borders were under constant pressure from Germanic tribes in the north and the Persian Empire in the east. Its economy was faltering under the immense cost of maintaining its army, leading to rampant inflation. And its politics were a deadly game of thrones, played with daggers in the dark. The ruling dynasty, the Severans, were themselves outsiders, a fact that both broadened the empire's identity and frayed its traditional fabric. Founded by the North African Septimius Severus, the family had brought Syrian blood into the heart of imperial power through his brilliant and powerful wife, Julia Domna. She was no mere consort, she was a philosopher, queen who ran a salon of Rome's greatest thinkers, a political partner to her husband known as Mother of the Camps for her influence with the military. She and her sister, Julia Maesa, represented a new kind of power in Rome, educated, politically astute, foreign, and female. It was this family a dynasty of powerful, intelligent, and ruthless Syrian women that would orchestrate the rise of Elagabalus. Their comfort with wielding power from behind the throne set a dangerous precedent, showing that the emperor himself could be an instrument rather than the player. The story of how this family of outsiders placed a teenage priest on the throne is one of ambition, intrigue, and ruthless political maneuvering. It's a tale that reveals the hidden power structures of Rome, and we'll be diving deep into stories just like this. To make sure you don't miss out on the most shocking and fascinating sagas from history, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. At the center of this web was Julia Maesa, Julia Domna's sister and the emperor's sister-in-law. Ambitious and calculating, she had tasted power in Rome and was not about to let it go. Her chance came in 217 AD, when the Emperor Caracalla, her own nephew, was assassinated, and the throne was seized by his praetorian prefect, Macrinus. Macrinus was a capable administrator, but he made a fatal error. He exiled Julia Maesa and her family back to their home in Syria. He sent them to the city of Emesa, the very source of their power, to the great temple of the sun god Elagabal. He thought he was removing a threat. In reality, he had sent the spark back to the powder keg. In Emesa, Julia Maesa's grandson was the hereditary high priest of Elagabal. The boy's name was Bassianus, but history would know him by the name of his god. He was just 14 years old, charismatic, beautiful, and accustomed to the divine authority of a priest-king. The god he served was not a Roman-style anthropomorphic deity, but a conical black stone likely, a meteorite housed in one of the most magnificent temples in the East. This was a cult of ecstatic, sensual worship, filled with music, dancing, and opulent ceremony, a world away from the stately, civic-minded religion of Rome. In the echoing halls of the great temple, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of incense and the constant hypnotic drone of priestly chants, Maesa began her work. She observed her grandson not as a grandmother would, but as a master strategist assesses a key asset. She saw how his natural charisma was amplified by the mystique of his office, how soldiers of the local legion, stationed nearby, looked at him with a mixture of awe and reverence. She began to subtly mold him, whispering stories of his father Caracalla, filling his head with visions of a destiny far grander than that of a provincial priest. She started a brilliant whisper campaign, a rumor that Bassianus was not just Caracalla's cousin, but his illegitimate son. It was a lie, but a powerful one. It gave the boy a direct claim to the beloved, if bloody, Severan line. She was not just plotting a coup, she was crafting a messiah. She began to meticulously weave her conspiracy. She didn't just spread rumors, she targeted specific, disgruntled centurions, men who felt overlooked by the new regime. Using her vast family fortune, she sent secret envoys with promises not just of gold, but of promotions, governorships, and a return to the glory days of the Severan dynasty. The risk was immense. One wrong word could mean the execution of her entire family. The tension culminated on that fateful night of May 16, 218 AD, when she and her daughter, Julia Soaemias, smuggled the boy into the legionary camp. Dressed in the imperial purple over his priestly robes, the 14-year-old stood before the soldiers. Bolstered by Mace's gold, the legionaries hailed him as emperor. The rebellion had begun. Macrinus, the reigning emperor, was caught completely off guard. He sent forces to crush the boy claimant, but legion after legion defected. The promise of Severan legitimacy and gold was too strong. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Antioch. Early in the fighting, Macrinus's forces gained the upper hand, and the rebel legion began to break. In a moment that secured their family's power, Julia Maesa and Julia Soaemias leapt from their chariots and threw themselves before the fleeing troops, shaming them with cries of loyalty and courage. And physically blocking their retreat, rallied by the two women, the soldiers turned and fought with renewed fury. Macrinus's forces were routed. He fled for his life, disguised as a common courier, but his imperial mannerisms gave him away. He was captured and executed before he could reach the safety of Rome. Just like that, a 14-year-old Syrian priest who had never seen Rome was the undisputed master of the Roman world. The plan, masterminded by Julia Maesa, had worked perfectly. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They believed their young emperor would be a puppet. They were about to find out he had a divine mission all his own. The journey from Syria to Rome took over a year, a period where the emperor's disturbing eccentricities festered and grew, far from the tempering influence of the capital. This was no imperial progress. It was a slow-moving religious procession that scandalized the provinces it crossed. He ordered the execution of a respected governor who refused to partake in a ritual for the Black Stone. He surrounded himself with dancers, eunuchs, and mystics, ignoring the veteran generals who tried to advise him on matters of state. A defining moment of this journey came when he sent a portrait of himself to be hung in the Senate House in Rome. Senators, expecting an image of a powerful commander in armor, were instead confronted with a painting of their new emperor in full priestly regalia, gold and silk robes, heavy eye makeup, rouged cheek standing beside his conical stone god. He ordered that senators should make offerings to the painting before commencing any business. The message was clear and chilling. This was not a leader who would adapt to Rome. This was a leader who expected Rome to adapt to him. The air in the city grew thick with dread. When Elagabalus finally entered the city, his appearance, silks, makeup, jewel swathes, just the prelude. The true shock was the arrival of the Black Stone. He declared it the supreme deity, building it a magnificent new temple, the Elagabalium, on the Palatine Hill, the sacred heart of Rome. From here, he unleashed a cultural revolution. He established a so-called Senate of Women, a cenaculum on the Quirinal Hill, presided over by his mother. While the Roman Senate debated war and taxes, this council decreed rules on court etiquette, what jewelry noblewomen could wear, and which types of carriages they could use. It was a direct and public mockery of the patriarchal Roman establishment. His religious mania reached new heights when he decided his god needed a wife. Not content with marrying a Vestal virgin himself, an act of supreme sacrilege for which any other Roman would be executed, he declared that the god Elagabal would marry the Roman goddess Minerva. He ordered her ancient, sacred statue to be forcibly removed from its temple and brought to the palace, where a divine marriage ceremony was held between the statue and the stone. For the people of Rome, this was not just sacrilege. It was a horrifying act of divine kidnapping. He further cemented his control by debasing the currency, reducing the silver content of the denarius not for economic policy, but to fund his ever more lavish religious festivals and to shower gifts upon his favorites. The financial stability of the empire was being sacrificed at the altar of his personal god. He even staged elaborate banquets that were exercises in psychological cruelty, serving his guests dishes of glass or paintings of food, and then laughing as they went hungry. He would seat them on inflatable cushions that would secretly be deflated, dropping the shocked dignitaries under the table while he and his favorites roared with laughter. He took pleasure in appointing his cronies to the most vital positions in the empire. A dancer was made prefect of the city watch. A barber was put in charge of the grain supply. Competence and experience meant nothing. All that mattered was proximity to the emperor and a willingness to indulge his whims. This systematic replacement of qualified officials with unqualified sycophants began to paralyze the state. Shipments of grain became unreliable, leading to grumbling and shortages in the city. The aqueducts fell into disrepair. The intricate machinery of Roman administration, built over centuries, was being dismantled piece by piece in favor of courtly chaos. His personal life remained the epicenter of the scandal. His marriage to the charioteer Hierocles was a daily spectacle of inverted Roman values. Elagabalus delighted in being called Hierocles' wife and queen, and would reportedly suffer beatings from his husband with pride, boasting of the black eyes. But the court was a viper's nest of jealousy. When Elagabalus became infatuated with an athlete from Smyrna named Zodicus, whose physique he adored, Hierocles saw a threat. Fearing he would be replaced, he had Zodicus poisoned. The emperor, enraged at the loss of his new favorite, had Zodicus exiled, a stark reminder that life in the imperial inner circle was a deadly game. The great institutions of Rome were made a mockery. The Senate was forced to officially welcome his husband, Hierocles, as if he were an empress. The military, the bedrock of Roman power, was utterly alienated. How could soldiers on the Rhine or the Danube frontiers respect a commander-in-chief who spent his days trying on wigs and officiating bizarre foreign rites? The discontent spread beyond the generals. Common soldiers, men who revered tradition and martial valor, began to see him not as an emperor, but as an infection at the heart of the empire. Absolute power had met absolute defiance of convention, and the Roman system began to break. The very woman who had put him on the throne, his grandmother Julia Maesa, watched in horror. She had wanted a controllable puppet. Instead, she had unleashed a revolutionary who threatened to bring the whole structure crashing down. The turning point came when she received secret reports from senior commanders, warning that the legions were on the verge of open mutiny. They would not march under his command. They would not fight for a woman emperor. She knew she had to act, and fast. In a series of clandestine meetings in the dead of night, she began her new conspiracy. She had to navigate a minefield of Roman pride, promising deeply offended Praetorian commanders wealth and, more importantly, a restoration of dignity. Her eyes fell on her other grandson, Elagabalus' cousin, Alexander Severus. He was the perfect antidote, quiet, modest, and traditionally Roman. Where Elagabalus was flamboyant, Alexander was reserved. Where Elagabalus engaged in ecstatic foreign rituals, Alexander was tutored in Latin literature and Roman law. Maesa began a campaign to promote him, ensuring he was seen in public practicing martial skills and showing deference to the Senate. She convinced Elagabalus to formally adopt him as heir, a move meant to placate the growing opposition. But Elagabalus was not a fool. He saw his cousin's rising popularity and his own waning influence. He sensed the trap. His paranoia spiraled into public displays of cruelty. He became obsessed with the aesthetics of his own death, demanding that his servants prepare for him a silken rope for a luxurious hanging or golden daggers for a noble suicide, should the need arise. He would stage public trials of his enemies, real or imagined, often presiding over them from a high throne while dressed as a woman, laughing as the sentences were read. The atmosphere in the palace became thick with terror. No one knew who would be the next target of his whims. Courtiers whispered in shadowed hallways, their eyes darting nervously as the emperor's mood swung from ecstatic religious fervor to black, violent rage. He began to see plots everywhere, and his response was always the same: more sacrifices, more outlandish ceremonies, and more punishments. He tried to have Alexander assassinated multiple times, but each attempt was foiled by the secret protection network Maesa had established. Finally, he stripped his cousin of his titles and spread a rumor that Alexander was dying, hoping to test the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. It was the final miscalculation. The Praetorian Guard, whose loyalty had been bought but whose respect was long gone, now made their choice. They openly demanded to see Alexander alive in their camp. When the order came from Elagabalus to kill the ringleaders of this protest, they refused. They protected the boy, turning their backs on their own emperor. The line had been crossed. Elagabalus had lost control of his own guards. The end was now not a matter of if, but when. The final act took place on the 11th of March, 222 AD. Realizing his authority was gone, Elagabalus, accompanied by his mother, Julia Soamias, made a desperate visit to the Praetorian camp to try and regain control. It was a fatal mistake. The moment they entered, the trap was sprung. The soldiers acclaimed Alexander as emperor. Chaos erupted. Elagabalus and his mother fled, hiding in a chest used for camp latrines to be smuggled out. They were discovered. The scene was one of brutal fury. The boy, who had been hailed as a god emperor, was now powerless. An 18-year-old facing down the rage of men he had systematically alienated. His mother tried to shield him with her own body, but they were both cut down, slaughtered on the dusty floor of the camp. But for the soldiers, and for the Senate who sanctioned their actions, death was not enough. They subjected Elagabalus to the damnatio memoriae, damnation of memory. His body, and that of his mother, were dragged through the streets of Rome, a final, public humiliation. They were thrown into the city's sewer, and then, to ensure no proper burial could ever take place, hauled out and cast into the Tiber River. The people of Rome, who had been forced to endure 4 years of his rule, poured into the streets to celebrate his demise. His name was chiseled from inscriptions, his statues were torn down, his religious revolution was systematically dismantled. The sacred black stone was quietly packed up and shipped back to Syria. The Elagabalus was rededicated to Jupiter. Every coin bearing his likeness was recalled and melted down. The Senate passed a decree that no Roman emperor should ever again bear the name Antoninus, a name he had so thoroughly defiled. It was as if Rome was trying to convince itself the last 4 years had never happened. The new regime, with the now 13-year-old Alexander as emperor, but firmly guided by Julia Maesa and Alexander's mother, Julia Mamaea, began a systematic campaign of restoration. They reinstated qualified senators to key posts, publicly honored the old gods, and projected an image of sober, traditional Roman virtue. The cleansing was total. So how do we judge this teenage emperor? Was he the monster of depravity the Roman historians portrayed? Was he a mentally unstable youth, broken by the pressure of absolute power, or was he something else? A devout religious reformer whose beliefs were simply too alien for Rome to stomach? A gender-fluid individual, perhaps the first transgender ruler in recorded history, born into an empire that had no language for what he was? The truth is, he was likely all of these things. His story reveals more about Rome than it does about him. It reveals the empire's deep-seated anxieties about the East, about religion, about sex, and about identity. Elagabalus was a mirror held up to Rome, and Rome was horrified by the reflection. He represented the other in every conceivable way, foreign, effeminate, religiously fanatical, and he had been placed at the very center of power. His reign exposed the fragility of Roman identity, an identity that was already being diluted by the realities of a vast, multicultural empire. He tried to remake the world's greatest empire in his own image, according to his own divine and personal truths. He failed, spectacularly. But in that brief, explosive reign, he ripped the mask off Roman society and revealed the deep cracks in its foundation. His legacy, which the Romans tried so hard to erase, is a powerful and eternal cautionary tale about the limits of power, the ferocity of tradition, and what happens when the one who rules is the one who dares to be different.